the continued use of barrel bombs across Syria results in significant civilian casualties and severe injuries. Functioning schools have been the subject of a marked number of attacks, resulting in children being killed and injured.
Syria is committed to provide 80% of the needs of its people without discrimination or distinction.
The worsening humanitarian situation in certain areas of Syria that has evolved due to the extreme violence committed by terrorist groups, some organized and financed by Israeli regime.
Syria has given a lesson to the world with the holding of presidential elections undertaken in a democratic and transparent manner, where President Bashar al-Assad was victorious, reaffirming his leadership of the legitimate government of Syria.
UN Watch, you have the floor.
Mr. President, what the Commission of Inquiry has just described is a living hell, faced with continuing reports of Syria's mass murder, torture, rape, and gassing of civilians by chemical weapons. How is the UN responding? With notable exceptions, this inquiry being one, the UN's policy towards Syria can be described in 3 words: business as usual. Consider the following. In November 2011, well into Syria's atrocities, UNESCO elected the Syrian regime unanimously to its Human Rights Committee. I asked the Commission, what message did the UN send when, up until only a few months ago, it allowed the Assad regime to sit as a judge of petitions submitted by human rights victims from around the world? But, Mr. President, it didn't stop there. On February 20th of this year, as Syria's Juhayna News trumpeted with glee, that country, that mass-murdering regime, was, quote, unanimously re-elected as rapporteur of the UN Special Committee on Decolonization. In fact, as we meet, that committee, with Syria as its rapporteur, is in session this week in New York, debating the future of Gibraltar, the Falklands, Bermuda, French Polynesia, and New Caledonia. So while Assad's forces starve Palestinians to death in Yarmouk, his representative sits on a UN podium telling democracies like Britain, France, the US, and New Zealand how to treat their populations, all in exercise of his UN-elected mandate to end the, quote, subjugation, domination, and exploitation of peoples. But, Mr. President, it didn't stop there. In March, this Council undermined its own credibility on Syrian human rights by adopting a resolution entitled, quote, Human Rights in the Occupied Syrian Golan, a resolution drafted by Syria itself. The U.S. delegate commented at the time, quote, to consider such a resolution while the Syrian regime continues to slaughter its own citizens by the tens of thousands exemplifies absurdity. Mr. President, if we say we care about Syria's dead and dying, then why are we acting like it's business as usual? Thank you, Mr. President.